Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as we are into summer holiday season, it's noticeable that the Brexit media are full of tales of woe about how hard it is to actually go on holiday thanks to Brexit. It's almost as if they didn't understand what the ending of freedom of movement really meant. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So we already had the Brexit commentators whining at the French due to the especially bad backlog at Dover last week. They're now sort of pretending it's gone. It hasn't. It's just not as bad. The delays are always there. But now they're complaining at Spain and Portugal as well. The Daily Express had a story yesterday, or was it the day before now, earlier this week, not for the first time, on someone having their holiday knackered because their passport wasn't valid. Naturally, this is not how the Express present it. They report on the tragic case of a woman being escorted out of the departure lounge like a criminal, she says, because her passport wasn't accepted despite being in date. How unreasonable. But of course, it wasn't enough in date, was it? The passports of third countries must have 6 months left and have been issued in the last 10 years before it is considered valid for travel into an EU country. It's not a new rule, it's a rule we helped to create. In fact, we voted for it. It's just newly applied to us because we are newly a third country. It didn't matter while we were a member of the single market, and it works both ways. We have made it much more difficult for EU citizens to travel to Britain as well. Of course, Brexiteers seem to approve of that. It's almost like they thought freedom of movement only works one way. When Priti Patel boasted about bringing about the end of freedom of movement, I wondered at the time if the people this message was intended for really fully understood what she was saying. Of course not. I think people are going to get increasingly bitter about their loss of freedom. It's the one Labour policy that I am seriously critical of. I completely back them, I've said before, completely back them to adopt whatever position is needed to form a government at the next election. They must win. We have to stop this. A task made more difficult due to the fact the Tories are legislating to weaken the democratic process further than it already was, although they are doing us a favour by potentially making Liz Truss the Prime Minister. But insisting that freedom of movement won't be part of the deal in the next Parliament, it doesn't sit right with me. It'll be a policy that gets dropped for the following election. I think it'll have to be. But even in the short term, I just query, is it not even a risky position to adopt for the rest of this Parliament? Because for all the disdain some people have for politicians who sit on the fence, if you're several years out from an election and politics is in a state of complete chaos with a fickle electorate, it is sometimes necessary to not be totally committal. But I just don't know how certain we can be that target voters will still be against freedom of movement in even 2 years' time. You know, there were stories of Brexit angst last summer as well. It all came out. You know, in fact, the Daily Express, I'm quite sure if I checked, would have done a story last year about someone who couldn't travel because their passport had less than 6 months on it. I'm quite sure that's happened. And yet they're reporting again this year as if it's news. You know, this very issue of people being unable to travel because they've just had a few months left on the passport and didn't realise this wasn't enough, that tells you something in itself. This is how good the con job by the Tories has been. The would-be holidaymakers getting caught out had to not even consider that Brexit would have affected their own freedom of movement. The concept of ending freedom of movement has been a very public aspect of Brexit. So why wouldn't someone travelling to the EU have checked what changes Brexit brought? It can only be because too many people believe the lies that actually nothing really will change. In fact, our friend Michael puts this really well. So, I mean, Brexiteers cheered the end to freedom of movement, but when it comes to facing the consequences of this, they all claim it's got nothing to do with it. Apparently, when UK citizens denied their freedom to move, it's not Brexit, that's not Brexit. Yeah, but weren't you pleased that Brexit brought an end to freedom of movement? Oh, yeah, absolutely. But your freedom to move has ended as well. No, that's not Brexit. What? The cognitive dissonance makes my head hurt. Actually, right now, I think it's probably flu making my head hurt. But the contradictory Brexit doublethink often hurts it as well, even when I'm healthy. After all, the best the still committed Brexiteers can do is claim that Brexit isn't actually doing anything. They deny the harm, but can't claim any good that isn't a blatant lie. So they're claiming it does nothing. That's what they're claiming Brexit does, that it does nothing. In which case, why did we destroy our politics to get it? And what would be the big deal in reversing it? And it's not just France and Portugal. The Brexit commentators are complaining about Spain as well. Holiday makers have reacted with fury over new plans to deny Brits entry to Spain if they cannot prove they can spend a minimum of £85 each day of their trip. Reacted with fury, eh? What's that fury going to be worth then? We seem to have a bit of a problem in British politics right now, in that so many people behind so many causes have a complete inability to correctly identify the problem. A recent YouGov poll asked people who they blamed for the congestion at Dover. Was it additional Brexit checks, or was it France's border control? Now, unsurprisingly, Remainers tended to blame the additional Brexit checks, and Leavers mostly blamed France's border controls. But this belies the ignorance of the poll. As Professor Chris Gray pointed out, they're the same thing. Additional Brexit checks or France's border controls, they're the same thing. The additional Brexit checks at the border with France are France's border controls. And France's border controls changed because of Brexit. It's really this simple. Needing extra checks to get through a border with an EU country, needing more than 6 months left on your passport, having to prove you can flash the cash to visit Spain, all of these are examples of another country exercising their sovereign right to decide who comes into their country. How can they complain about sovereignty? And all of these things as well are the consequence of losing our freedom of movement. And what I suspect too few still understand is that the process has not ended. It's still got some way to go. There are two major obstacles on the horizon that spring to mind. The first is the visa waiver system. This will affect everyone, actually. It'll affect most EU citizens trying to enter Britain, just as it will affect British citizens trying to exit into the EU. Irish passport holders are absolutely fine either way. Another win for the Irish passport. But like I say, the end of freedom of movement works both ways. But it is way more serious for a single island, which has its freedom to move obliterated on virtually the entire continent, than it is for the rest of that continent to find it more difficult to get to that island off its north coast. This is just going to make it more difficult for non-Irish EU citizens to visit Britain. It will also make it more difficult for British citizens without an Irish passport to visit the EU as well. I don't actually know which will be worse, in fact. The media, of course, will make the extra loss of freedom of movement to us seem the more important. Fine by me, keep pointing out the problems of Brexit. The second are the biometric checks. I even tried to explain this one to the shock jock Julia Hartley-Brewer. She was either completely ignorant of the basics or pretending to be. No doubt when it happens, she will claim to be shocked and horrified at this new outrage. I wonder if I should remind her at the time that I did point it out months earlier and she completely dismissed it. And the biometric checks are going to be a particular problem at seaports. Airports, as long as the machine works and as long as your passport chip works, it's just a case of queuing. Queue up, scan, done. But at the likes of Dover, people are in vehicles, cars, lorries, whatever. Can't drive through an e-gate, can you? No, drivers and all passengers are going to have to get out, walk over to the e-gate, get scanned in, walk back. When this system comes online, Dover is in for a very bad time unless a solution is found. And I've seen no sign that the government are even looking for a solution. I hope they are, but if they are, they're doing it very quietly. So I do anticipate yet more stories of Brexit woe for travel to the EU this summer. Not just tourists, also lorry drivers who are now finding less bandwidth as they share the road with more cars this year. Last year, there was much less travel because of COVID, so lorries had a bit of an easier time of it. Now they're all competing. But it'll be worse next year. And as people who travel to the EU regularly will notice things getting worse year on year, and given that many are key target voters, I do wonder if trying to defend the end to freedom of movement will be sensible even in the medium term. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.